This is Grant Schneider from Upstart. Please all welcome him. He's in charge of everything that happens at the company, everywhere.
At all times.
Well, except that Catherine is apparently in charge of the big grand opening party that's going to go down on, when is it? December 3rd? See, I have a pretty decent memory. I've not consumed so much alcohol over my life that I can't remember small facts like that. Thank you for doing this and being here.
Thanks for having me.
You are, we ran into each other at Startup Week. You were speaking there, and so you're making the rounds of, promoting the company and all things Upstart. Is that good, enjoyable, or is that, a total pain in the ass?
It's been the best part about the new role has been getting to just talk about how awesome the stuff is that's going on over there. Yeah, that kind of offsets the other things that have come with it in terms of like negotiating rent or fixing leaking ceilings and things like that. Like anytime I get to get out in the public in some form, it's been just awesome. And
Catherine, who I'm now just apparently gonna call out Catherine like 1,000 times. She was actually the facilitator of this because we got coffee and she was like, hey, we're like a pretty cool company and we've grown pretty fast and HQ2 is, opening here. And I said, well, yeah, I would like to talk to Grant about that and do a startup grind. So Catherine also deserves credit for bringing this together. She also told me that you're dressed up today.
Yeah, these are my fancy clothes. Long pants and the vest is sort of how I signal that I'm taking something seriously.
Yeah, I was like, is he going to show up in a suit? And she was like, please. Typically, it's shorts and some sort of ratty T-shirt. I added the ratty T-shirt part.
Yeah, my line in the sand was it snowed last week, so I put on long pants for those purposes. But yeah, the long sleeves are formal.
I appreciate you dressing up.
Of course. At this point, it's kind of like part of the image at work. Like, hey, it's casual here, so like,
So
I'm not
now you have to wear shorts all
yeah,
the time?
I'm like pot committed at this point.
Yeah, got it. So let's dig into it. And maybe the best place to start for those that don't know is, what is Upstart? What problem do you guys solve? And how did this problem, get identified that ultimately a company got started around it?
Yeah, I think at the core level, we solved the problem that only 45% of Americans have access to prime credit, but 83% of them have never defaulted on a loan. So essentially, there's this gap between who has access to money and who deserves access to money. There are a lot of reasons for that I think you'll probably ask about, but essentially at its foundation, it's about extending access to credit to people that deserve it but don't have options for it. The company was founded by former Googlers who had left in 2012, and one person and the third co-founder actually had been denied a loan even though he sort of on paper was a bad credit risk by traditional models, but if you meet him and talk to him, he's just like an amazing, thoughtful person who had been given $100,000 from Peter Thiel for the Thiel Fellowship, and just like has all these interesting things going on, but the FICO score wasn't quite capturing this, and so the three of them got together and created this company.
Nice. I also need to. Is Danny Briggs here? Danny, hi. When Alex doesn't show up, then I just forget. So. Dickinson Wright, that sounds like a law firm because it is. Alex and Dickinson Wright have been longtime supporters, and Alex is probably, he's in Arizona, probably playing golf, right? Yeah, he's he avoids coming now, basically. So he probably took a trip to Arizona just to not be here. But he sent me a note that you were going to be here, so I apologize for not recognizing you earlier. Thank you for coming and the support. And you would have talked to Katie in the back from our team at AWH and Terry. There's a big guy in a white shirt somewhere. Oh, there he is. Are from our team at AWH. And Terry's actually the tallest person we've ever employed. And so now the objective is we're recruiting to see if we can hire somebody that's actually 7 feet tall. They actually don't have to have any skill.
Yeah.
If they're just 7 feet tall, we will hire them.
I've been launching a basketball team, so we may compete for that person with you just based on those qualifications.
Okay, game on. So let's talk, and I'm going to jump around a little bit just to try to weave a a fairly interesting tale as part of this. So this problem gets identified, company sort of comes together, and founders come together to start it, and then where do you come into the picture, and when? How does that come to be, and then why did that make sense for you?
Sure. So in 2012, the company was started and formed around this product known as an income share agreement, or an ISA, with the idea here being instead of debt, it's equity in oneself. So I'll trade you 1% of my income for the next 10 years for X dollars today or something. So this cool, interesting product that got a lot of hype, but ultimately wasn't a great business. You had to sort of educate the consumer on it, and it's just like pushing a rock up a hill.
So say that apart again. It started out as this weird sort of investment tool mechanism thing?
Yeah, so instead of a loan with fixed payments, it would have been a sort of a loan with variable payments depending on your income. So the nice thing is you lose your job, you don't owe any money. If you strike it rich, then you owe a ton of money. And so there's like a nice appeal to it, but it's very strange and can be flipped around, and it's just, it's weird, I guess, to many people. Because of its weirdness or coolness, one person's weirdness is another's coolness, it got a lot of press. I was sitting at OSU sort of procrastinating on my dissertation when I read a story on like Bloomberg or something like that about this company, and just sort of sent them a cold email like, hey, I'm about to finish this degree. I don't have a job yet. Sounds like maybe like you guys could use somebody who knows a little bit about statistics. Are you hiring? If not, like, love what you're doing. That's cool. Luckily, they responded to this. I went out, met the team, and was just kind of blown away by like how humble, smart, and driven by the mission that everyone was. And just like, okay, I told my now wife, girlfriend at the time, Jing, like, hey, we've got to pack up the car, drive out to California, and just like pursue this. Like, we'll figure it out when we get there, kind of thing. And yeah, that was kind of how I ended up at Upstart in 2014.
Nice. How did the product then sort of evolve? It sounds like out of necessity to a degree, because it sounds like the original product and sort of idea was a little bit misunderstood, complicated. When did the shift happen, and how did that happen to sort of this direct personal lending product and model now?
Yeah, so between the time that I interviewed and when I started work, because I had to finish up school and write a dissertation, all this stuff, that pivot happened.
How much did you care about finishing the dissertation at that point?
Once I got the offer, the dissertation was just like a formality. It was, nobody's going to read this. I think my parents who are here today, like, shout out to them for driving up here. They were probably some of the only people who actually read it, because it was a fun problem to work on, but it was just an obscure branch of like stochastic calculus that, I don't know, if you want to go look it up and be bored, you can read it, but at that point it was just very much a formality. My advisors convinced me to like finish up a few things to get like a paper or two published out of it, but yeah, it was not where my passion lay. Yeah.
So then joined the company, and during that period, did they make the shift?
They had shifted. So I show up, and they've started working on loans. And so first, okay. So we're, I passed up offers from Chase, Capital One, all these other places. Like, I just drove a car across the country.
I could have worked at a company that looks just like you.
Yeah. But no, it became clear on the first day that although the product was different, it was a more traditional looking loan, the approach was very different. So the same principle as far as, using machine learning and alternative data and really getting a fuller picture of the applicant or the borrower, they were really doing something different. Whereas when I had interviewed at financial institutions, they would sort of treat underwriting as a solved problem. So sort of, we understand risk. We've got this score. This company, FICO, upgrades their scores every few years, and that's good enough for us. Whereas I could tell that it was very much not a solved problem, that everyone was working very hard on at the company. And so I quickly became a believer that, okay, we're doing something different, and this loan thing is actually going to be a successful business and allow us to achieve.
So how do you, without sharing anything that we're going to have to burn the tape over, how do you guys approach it differently? How are you underwriting and deciding who gets a loan and how much and for what terms differently than existing financial services companies have been?
Yeah, so we, in a few ways, so we sort of look more deeply into the credit report rather than just a single score. So there's information about past payments and sort of interactions that can be detected there if you're willing to build up the technical infrastructure around that. So that's just sort of because we've got great engineers that can sort of spin that up and make it easy to do analysis on. The stuff that tends to get more hype and press is the alternative data. So things like education, job history, and behavioral type things are what really is the most interesting. Sort of, side note is that my wife is from China, and so even though she was getting a PhD in stats, which is extremely employable, she was unable to get more than a $500 credit limit on her first credit card because of that sort of citizenship status. And so that education information would go directly into our model, and she would be sort of a typical use case for someone who would benefit greatly from not just the single score. And yeah.
That's a good segue into something that Catherine and I were talking about earlier, and then we brought up to you. There's apparently a controversy bubbling up around the Apple Card and Goldman Sachs, which is the financial company that underwrites the Apple Card, that the women are not being treated, scored, et cetera, in the same way that men are, and they're getting lower credit limits, or maybe not getting approved. And so what's your perspective on that, and is that sort of is that sort of rampant, and is that a normal operating procedure in legacy financial services companies?
Yeah, so I don't have too much of a perspective on the things specific to Apple or Goldman based on what seem to be two different stories on Twitter. But I can say that I feel very fortunate that Upstart has been, the leadership identified very early on that this was an area of risk in the industry in general, and that because we're doing some different or novel things, that this could be a particular risk area. So we very proactively reached out to government regulators, specifically the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And so in 2017, they issued what's known as a no action letter. And you can go read this if you like those sorts of things. But essentially it just says, okay, we as a government entity have sort of looked and decided that there is no reason to investigate you on these sort of different types of biases that folks might worry about. So I would describe that as, as not a lawyer, sort of, okay, we looked and there's no reason to investigate further. Thank you for opening the books. They then later came out and sort of doubled down on this and said, oh, Upstart is actually doing a good for the world. So they put out a public statement, which I think is pretty unusual for a regulator to come out in support of a company, and said they're actually, in fact, increasing approval rates for all these demographic groups that have traditionally been left behind, lowering interest rates for them, and so on. And so this, again, is a public statement that you can go read, where the regulator is coming out and singling Upstart out as doing a unique good for the world that's not common in the industry. So
Yeah, that actually sounds highly unusual for a regulatory body to come out and do that. That probably means that it was also unusual for an organization like Upstart to go to them and say, hey, we're just gonna start sending you information, and you can do with it what you want.
Oh yeah. We even developed some like custom sort of framework around this that is fairly open source that we'd be willing to share with other companies, but they have been a little resistant to often the relationship is a little more tense between the finance companies and the regulators. So it's just let's duck. We don't want any attention to that. We said no, we have nothing to hide. We are doing a good for the world. We've seen the data. Let's show them the data. And so we kind of opened up the books, and I think it's paid off greatly. And that's where their unusual statement sort of verifies this.
So let's start to weave Columbus into the conversation. So company gets started in California. Most of the team is there, I'm assuming, still to this day, from a percentage standpoint. And then why did they start thinking about a location outside of California? What was the impetus behind even sort of considering, a second location and an HQ2, if you will?
Yep. So all of the company was there at the beginning of 2019. Now it's, let's call it 2/3 of the company. So we've caught up quickly because of our great recruiting team, great people team. Our recruiters are here, Grace and Catherine. And so, yeah, a year ago this was just an idea, essentially. And the idea was essentially, okay, Silicon Valley is crazy right now. We need to hire a bunch of people. So we've sort of proven the business model works. We need to really scale this thing up and really just take it to the next level. In order to do that, we need more people. And frankly, more people than we could hire in a single location, particularly that location. So around October of last year, we started having conversations about a second office. And I essentially said, okay, well, I'm excited to go run this office wherever you put it. There were like maybe a few cities where I would say, I don't know about this. I can't take my family there. But for the most part, it was, okay, wherever you put this, I'm happy to do it. If you put it in Columbus, this is going to take on a personal, moral aspect to it where nights and weekends and those late hours like are going to mean more than just this business opportunity, which I think helped a little bit. But we are a very data-driven company, so I often describe it as I was the salesperson, and I just was very lucky that I had a good product in the city of Columbus to sell. In that we've got the university here, we've got a great finance institution, or sort of a great set of financial institutions here that we can sell our technology to. There's a sort of burgeoning tech scene that's not so developed as to like not feel like we can make a dent, but is established enough that there are like, you know, things like this to do. And so it's kind of at the sweet spot where we feel like we can help shape it, but also we're not building this thing from the ground up.
So how did the decision around Columbus ultimately get made then? Was it, you know, it came down to Columbus and, I mean, this is too much of a softball, but I'm just going to say, did it come down to Columbus and Ann Arbor? Is that
No.
is that really what happened?
No, Ann Arbor, so our CEO actually is a Michigan grad. So there was a little bit of disbelief in his voice when I pitched Columbus, or maybe pain when he made the announcement. But he had a really creative like way of announcing it to the rest of the company, where it was around Halloween when we sort of decided internally that we were going to do it. So he, dressed up as an Ohio State football player, and it was a whole thing. So we, in the same CEO, Dave has an article called "Speed is a Habit," which is essentially it's great reading. I encourage all of you to go read it if you've got the time. This was embodied in the decision to do Columbus, where I was sitting in a meeting probably a year ago, like middle of October, and I think within that meeting, we were almost ready to make the decision then. But one of the other co-founders, Paul, the Teal fellow and my boss, said, "Oh, hold on, let's collect some data. Like, we can't just like,
We're supposed to be a data company.
Yeah,
right?
we need to like think this through, and let's write some scripts, scrape like LinkedIn and Zillow, and collect some data to make sure that this actually makes sense." So this was one of the more interesting data science projects that I ever got to work on.
So we got scraped? I feel so violated right now.
Yeah, well, only at a macro level. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they make APIs to make this super easy. So, but no, it's sort of just cost of living, quality of life, things like that Zillow provides, and then on LinkedIn, how many data scientists and software engineers are available versus sort of like the number of jobs for them. And we then computed a ratio of sort of supply and demand, roughly speaking, and said, what does this look like across different cities? And so early on, you could imagine there were conversations around, okay, well, Columbus, Nashville, St. Louis, sort of that size of city. And then there's, the Austins, the New York, Boston, Chicago was another one. And so ultimately it came down to Columbus versus Chicago, where, okay, well, if we're not going to do Columbus, why would we do Nashville? We've got someone from Columbus who wants to go back there. Why would Nashville make more sense? So you've just got to convince us that Chicago, with its many more people, isn't a better fit for, all these engineers and data scientists that you tell me we're going to be able to hire there. And then some of these metrics, the folks at Jobs Ohio and Columbus 2020, or One Columbus now, they really made a difference there too, in terms of just like the attitude and the warmth with which they welcomed us to town. I think was noticeably different from other conversations we had with other cities.
And it sounds like the journey around actual physical space has been spectacular.
Yeah.
You've been in a couple of co-working spaces, and now you have your own space that you're going to be doing a grand opening party around. But the fact that you moved so quickly probably presented some space challenges that maybe you were unprepared for, or maybe you expected.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the real estate industry moves at a much different pace than like the startup world, we knew that getting into it, but just the size of that difference still surprises us a little bit. So yeah, we hired our first employees in Columbus January 28th of this year, I believe, and so we had a co-working space with I think 2 rooms at the time. And everyone from engineers to the people team to data scientists were all in just one room, and then the operations team was in another room. And then I would travel back like roughly once a month for the next 6 months or so. And each trip it would alternate between, you're crazy, why did you get all this extra space? Because we would go to the co-working space and say like, give us 2 more rooms or 4 more rooms or whatever it might be. So what are we going to do with all this space? You're crazy, to oh my God, we need more rooms. Like, where are we going to grow into? Ultimately, the co-working space we were in just sort of ran out of physical space. Like, it was, okay, well, we can't have adjacent space anymore, so let's, like, stick it here and there and so on. And so then, luckily, down the street in the same building that we're now in, a new co-working space opened up and didn't have any tenants, so we were able to, slide in there and just grab a whole bunch of space to sort of, like, minimize the distance we had to move into our permanent home 1 floor up, which we've just been in for like days now.
It's man, what a sweet opportunity and timing for that second co-working space that
Yeah.
you guys came in as their first customer and basically just took it all. That's either the worst case scenario or the best case scenario. Because once you left to go to your own space, then they probably were like, oh my God, now we have to go find customers.
Yeah, so I think it was really a win-win, like as cheesy as that sounds, in that, upon opening their doors, it takes a little while to fill that up. So they sort of build into their business model, we're not gonna have anyone in here for the first 3 months. Oh wow, this company wants to come in and take like a ton of space. And we were very transparent about, hey, we'll move out on this date. Like, we're moving upstairs on X date, like it probably won't slip by more than a couple weeks, if at all, so like, hey, plan for it. And so I think it was sort of like, that space would have gone to waste otherwise, just because of how long it takes to find a tenant of our size. Like, I think when we moved in, we were probably at 60 people. By the time we moved out, it was 105 or so. And so not a ton of other companies planning to just knock down their doors for them.
So that's pretty crazy in the span of what would be really like 9 months, right? Over 100 people.
Yeah. So 122, I think, when I checked. I figured I might get asked this question. So I checked this morning, and it was 122. 3 of us moved here from the Bay Area. So 3 of us are transplants. The rest are hired in Columbus. And yeah, Dave, the CEO, mentioned we'd like to hire 100 people in 2019. We said, oh, this is crazy. Don't say that to anyone out loud. Like there's no way we're going to hit that. I said, nah, this sounds like a good goal to like motivate people. Like, we'll put out some absurd goal, and that'll just like make you work towards that. Everyone knows you're not going to hit that, but like you got to have stretch goals. And so to like exceed that by, I guess, 22% is pretty crazy, with a few more people to start after this. Like, I think even the wildest projections didn't expect that we'd find so many great people in Columbus across all the roles. And yeah, it's exceeded expectations greatly.
So you're happy with the progress, and has Columbus become, the Columbus operation become what you expected it to be, or has it outstripped those expectations?
Yeah. So I am very happy. I mean, I love Columbus. So if you had gotten me to Columbus and we had just like kind of hit expectations, that would have been a win for me. Like, being plugged into this scene was good enough for me personally. From the business perspective, I think, it's just a wild success. Like, it was described to me by the co-founders as like one of the company's most successful initiatives ever, like at least top 5. And so, and those words don't come lightly, I think. And so this has definitely outstripped any expectations there. What's really been exciting these past few months is, so, the early part of the year we were hiring people and seeing that growth, and you start out, oh, can we find people? And then a few months go by, and it's like, oh wow, we are finding a ton of people. And then now getting to actually see that ramp up in productivity, and seeing Columbus take ownership of more, parts of the code base or more operational processes and things like that. That's really kind of taken things to a new level, and that's been just the past few months where people are finally ramped up and contributing.
So who's here? Who are you guys hiring? Who are you continuing to look for and hire?
Yep. So we've got three large teams, like three main roles that we hire for here. The operations team, so helping borrowers navigate the website, checking docs, making sure that, because we use a lot of this non-traditional data, we've got to have some custom processes to make sure that you're not lying to us when you say you went to Harvard and make $1 million a year, things like that. So we've got a pretty extensive operations team. We've got software engineers and then data scientists. And then other teams as well with more to come in the future, I think, in terms of, because we've grown so much, we'll need more support functions as well.
So you are a mostly direct-to-consumer company. Is that going to remain the plan, or do you see some abilities, because I think you hinted at earlier having conversations with financial services companies, are there some commercial products, and is there a B2B model and plan moving forward?
Yep. So we view ourselves as still sort of optimizing for the consumer. So there's a ton of opportunity to provide access to credit at better rates than folks have gotten historically. But we do have enough of a track record now that we can come along to banks in a new initiative we call Powered by Upstart, which is essentially, okay, let's do what we're good at, which is, the website works really well, the algorithm's very different, we're extending access to credit to way more people than you're able to, with what you as a bank are good at, which is essentially access to capital. So we're still not yet a household name. We pay more we've got a higher cost of capital than a bank who doesn't have the same requirements. So we say, okay, well, we'll come and we'll license the technology to you so that we can directly pass those savings on to consumers. So we still view this as a sort of optimizing for the consumer through this partner that is the bank. Now, in some cases, that will be the bank's customers, and so we'll kind of reach out to them, and then they'll use this technology to help their existing customers, but it can also be plugging them into a new source of customers. So in some ways, it's business to business, but we are still hyper-focused on optimizing for the consumer, because if we do that well, then the investor side of it will sort of follow naturally.
Do you think that because it sounds like the genesis of the company and the focus has been really from a back end, making sure that you understand the underlying data and algorithms, is the company going to, do you feel like, and does the company have to become a better sort of consumer product company moving forward in making the user experience better and all of that, given that fact you started from a very sort of technical, statistical place?
Yeah, we sort of care about providing the best rates that we can and doing that without imposing too much friction on the borrower. So we're also very focused on sort of user research, making the experience as good as possible. So whether you get approved, making it as frictionless as possible so that we're not asking for a bunch of documents or putting a bunch of roadblocks in your way. And if you don't get improved, sort of suggesting to you why that was, what you can do to improve, and things like that. So I think, these pieces all fit together to make it such that in order to offer the best product we can, we need to offer low rates, first and foremost, make it easy to get those low rates, because maybe we can save you 100 or 200 basis points, but if we're asking you to go to your parents' house and get a diploma from 20 years ago, do you care enough to do that, or are you just going to go to a competitor? And so sort of we attack both these problems through machine learning, essentially, and so it all kind of fits together nicely to make the best consumer experience that we can.
How are you facilitating the two offices now working well together, given that at the beginning everybody was together and now everybody's not together? Has that been a challenge and you have found ways to overcome it, or did you put enough thought and intention into it that it never really presented a challenge?
So we put a lot of thought into it. Given the pace at which we did this, it was not enough thought, or there are definitely growing pains here. And I think the inherent...
You mean Slack just didn't solve
yeah,
all those problems?
Slack and email didn't quite solve it. As much as we would hope that creating, old channel and then like new channel with old channel name _ Columbus, that was not sufficient. So I think the inherent sort of trade-off that we're making is between keeping everything as one company. So how do we keep it as one cohesive group that has the same mission, the same principles, the same operating standards and things like that, while not requiring so much back and forth that progress slows down. Like if everything has to go back through California in order to get deployed to production, then why did we bother with it? And if we're too slowed down, we're not going to make progress. So this inherent trade-off is something that we've been wrestling with. Some of the ways we improve it are through process, just what things need to go back, what things don't. Let's be explicit about it, define it, empower people, try to push decision-making down as far as possible. Some of it is just having very open conversations and being like, hey, this isn't working, this is. I think we're really starting to tackle these problems now. Early on, it was very clear that because we had no Columbus employees early on, everyone in Columbus was sort of much newer than the median Bay Area employee. And so there was almost this necessary dependency where it's like, well, you wrote this code, you built this model, you know these problems, I need to go through you. Now that we're hitting our stride and really taking ownership of more things, it's more of a two-way conversation, and trying to figure out how to best do that is something we're actively working on. But if we can get a little bit better every day, then we'll get where we need to be.
So how's the company been funded? I mean, you mentioned it, the initial sort of, Peter Thiel, grant, scholarship. I'm assuming and how do you describe yourselves? So I'm going to work in another question before I finish the other question. Are you a fintech company? Are you a financial services company? Are you a technology company? Do you guys care how you're labeled or categorized at all?
Yeah, so we are an artificial intelligence / machine learning company that partners with banks. So we sort of operate, as a partner to financial institutions, but at our core, we are an artificial intelligence company.
And that, given the type of company you are, where you play, the product, it must require a significant amount of money to be able to back a company like this.
Yes.
How have you funded the company, and do you expect to continue to raise significant amounts of money to fund the growth and operation?
Yeah, so we've raised a few rounds of venture capital. I believe Series D, something in the neighborhood of, I think the last I checked, $145 million. I think we're mostly focused on the building out new products and sort of being hyper attuned to what customers need. I'm not able to speak to sort of future fundraising plans too specifically, but things have been great. The most recent round was led by Progressive, which was kind of an innovative partner for us to have. And the future looks great as well, assuming that we're able to continue executing like we have.
As you think of, was the Progressive thing intentional, or was that opportunistic?
Yeah, they were actually very progressive in their for the insurance industry in terms of many other insurance companies we've spoken to speak very highly of them as sort of the gold standard in terms of what other insurance companies aspire to be. We definitely see a lot of long-term partnership potential there. They've got a specific innovation lab that we work with and are trying to integrate tightly with. So I think they recognize the business opportunity, and sort of our position looks great, but the long-term partnership I think is really what got them excited and us excited as well. You can imagine they have access to very different customer base, data, et cetera, and are maybe excited about our ability to move quickly and sort of do interesting things in AI. But, yeah.
So you've mentioned speed a couple times, and that seems to be a very important tenet to the company's culture and way of operating. How do you guys walk that talk and not just have it be, a blog post that somebody wrote, and that you actually live it and then get value out of that? Because I think it's something that even startups that have, and founders that have read all the books and lean startup, et cetera, and they know they should move fast. It's uncomfortable to move at a pace that makes you uncomfortable.
Yep.
So how do you guys carry that out?
Yeah, I think one story that really made a mark on me was very early on in my time at Upstart. There was some some bug that inadvertently, like, I don't know, caused like strange emails to get sent to some group of people. So there was some big bug that was like very embarrassing at the scale that we were at. We were sort of panicking. And Dave, our CEO, sent out an email saying, oh, if mistakes like this didn't happen, then that means we're not moving very fast. So I think from the top down, this idea that we will tolerate mistakes, like we never want to make mistakes, but this is a cost of doing business. Of course, caveat that it's got to be within a certain class. Some mistakes are worse than others, and we would never make them, but or try to reduce those as much as possible. But within a certain class of, maybe we're going to have bugs in the code that cause minor hiccups. As long as we're learning from these and sort of understanding them, growing from them, this is a cost of doing business. And having that support from the highest level, I think, really instills this culture of, okay, we're going to do our best to minimize these, but at the end of the day, the alternative is just to not do things.
I have a funny story about an email going out that was not the email that was supposed to go out. One of the companies I was part of starting many years ago, our marketing person was sending out an email to everybody that was on our email list, and she had come back from the restroom, and it was out of toilet paper, and so she was also sending a message out to the team that said, who used up all the toilet paper and didn't replace it, and that's the email that went out to the customer list.
Yep. Yeah.
And so everybody thought it was funny, and we got lots of responses back, and we got lots of offers for people to buy us toilet paper because they thought we were so poor that we couldn't afford toilet paper, which was also partially true.
Right.
So it's some of those occasions. I also know that there's been lots of gaffes like that are consequential, and it's not just about toilet paper. But
Right.
yeah, sometimes those things actually buy you a little bit of goodwill too, in weird counterintuitive ways.
Yeah, you kind of own up to it, say, hey, this is how it happened. We have a very good culture around postmortems as well. So when a mistake happens, don't worry about assigning blame, but write a document sort of detailing what went wrong, both like at an individual level and at a process level. So the first time we make a mistake, that's a process problem. If someone makes mistakes repeatedly, then maybe that's a them issue. But I think this like blameless understanding is sort of the key there.
How do you have other principles besides speed that you guys hold very near and dear from a cultural perspective?
Yeah, so I think it's the ones that resonate most with me are sort of this idea of continuous improvement. So sort of make something better for our users every day. So even if it's something very small, this 1% compounded daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it may be, really adds up over time. And then doing the right thing even when it's hard, which is almost by definition hard to do in practice. But I think we've held true to those principles pretty well.
Do you have any sort of routines, methodologies, things that you follow that allow you to perform at a high level and presumably, be a good leader for Upstart and, specifically the HQ2 in Columbus? Don't look at them.
Our people team is laughing at me because they know I could talk for the rest of this time about the weird things that I do. So Grace is suspicious whether any of these things work, I think, but I'm trying to convince her to skip breakfast, and then slowly this will transition into fasting and just not eating for days. But weird thing, not weird if you also try them, but interesting things that I like to try and experiment with are fasting, both intermittent and 1, 3 day, etc.
Why?
I feel like there are questionable health benefits, so it may or may not be good for my health, but it helps me think. Even if it's placebo effect, it is sufficient enough that I'm willing to do it every day. So I find that I think more clearly on an empty stomach.
Really?
Yeah, much more clearly. It takes some getting used to. Don't try this tomorrow and think that it will work. You gotta stick with it for a week, maybe a month, but you will, find a noticeable difference, I think. Now, there are costs to this. My memory is much worse than what it is when I eat well. So if you're willing to trade off memory for problem solving, then I greatly encourage you to experiment with fasting, which is not a trade-off everyone wants to make. Depending on your role,
Grace, I think I might be with you. Okay, give us another one.
Fasting. Okay, so I I am really into saunas and steam rooms. So when we moved to Columbus, we moved into a house that needed some remodeling, and my wife wanted the kitchen, the floors, and a bunch of stuff done. My only demand, or it wasn't even a demand, it was a request that she thought was a joke, was that we would have a steam room. And it turns out that you can get a machine and some special doors and turn your shower into a steam room for not that much money. And so I will, strangely enough, given that this was my one request, that is the last part of the remodeling that's getting done. I don't know if my wife did it on purpose, but
Well, we know who's in power
yes,
in this relationship.
Absolutely. But this will be completed soon, and it will save me a great deal of travel time to various steam rooms in the area.
So why do you like steam rooms? What's the value for you out of saunas and steam rooms and, sweating your ass off?
Yeah, I think it. So again, there are questionable health benefits around like detoxifying and things like that. So I often do these things with Paul, our co-founder. Well, not with him, but we sort of send each other studies.
Here comes the scandalous part.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We send each other studies about the benefits and then compare notes on our cold showers and how successful we are on keeping up with the cold shower regimen.
Cold showers is the third one I picked up on.
Cold showers as well.
Okay, so we're not going to eat.
Yes.
We're going to sweat a ridiculous amount profusely.
Yep.
And then we're going to take cold showers.
Cold showers, yes.
Okay.
Which is much easier to adhere to in the Bay Area than this time of year, this temperature. So my adherence has dipped from 95% of my showers being cold to 80% now. So it's much harder when it's cold out. So this stuff isn't easy. So and there's also a little social stigma. So if you're at the gym or even at home, just the yells that still come out when that cold water hits you, my wife still thinks I'm crazy. So it's not for everyone. What was the point of that? So I think these things make, there's a certain win that you get early in the day from knowing the hardest part of your day is over. Standing there in that cold water for 5 minutes, nothing I deal with, no customer complaint, no bug, no problem at the office is going to be harder mentally than that. And so there's a certain meditative aspect to it that I think is helpful.
I read a story many years ago now that said if you just make your bed first thing in the morning because you accomplished something, so maybe just try making your bed.
I
maybe you wouldn't have to take a cold shower anymore and you'd still feel equally good.
Yeah, I do that as well.
I mean, it's not that challenging making your bed, but so I actually did read recently too that taking a cold shower is better for your hair because we should not be washing our hair in hot water. I read an article recently, which I had no idea was true, because this one guy was saying that if you wash your hair in cold water, your hair will be more resilient and et cetera, et cetera. So we have one thing in common. I started taking cold showers
Nice.
3 months ago.
See, it's
Yes.
not as weird as.
So I'm also, I'm not sure I'm happy about it.
Okay.
So the jury's still out.
Yeah.
Yes, but apparently cold showers is and this guy was saying that athletes, do it, because it's also healing and it helps them recover and it makes your muscles in your body more resilient too, versus jumping into a hot shower. So there's actually apparently some science behind it.
Yeah. I think with most of these things, there is some science. I'm always just concerned about going down the rabbit hole. As a sort of classically trained statistician, when I read these research papers, it takes so much time to fully convince myself of their health benefits that I instead just say, I don't think this is bad for me, and I hear sort of second or third hand that it's good for me, so good enough for me. So.
Do you meditate?
Yes, yeah. I use Headspace and try to do that at least 3 to 5 times a week.
Who meditates here? Okay, good, effective, work. Couldn't live without it. Who has tried to meditate and it hasn't worked? Oh, you can admit it. Come on. Okay, somebody in the back, because I've tried to meditate, and then I just start thinking about stuff, and then it all goes to shit, and then I have to get up.
Yeah, and that's why I need the app, because if it was just me sitting in a room, I couldn't do it. I need this countdown and knowing that the Headspace guy is walking me through it. Otherwise, I'd get bored or check email or all this the opposite stuff of meditation.
So I've struggled with it.
Well, so in the steam room, I actually, since my wife is from China, I actually learned my Mandarin in there. So I combine something I have to do, which is learn Mandarin so that my son and wife can't talk about me, with something I like doing, which is a steam room. But yeah, maybe, I do like the efficiency of trying to pair more of this together, so I'll test it out.
If you've got a question, raise your hand, and Katie, who's now grabbing the mic. And do you know how to turn it on? The button on the left that has the little power button on it. If you press and hold it in, then the light will turn green. If you've got a question, raise your hand, and Katie will get you the mic. As you think, here we go.
So you mentioned a high school diploma is one of the data points you use for lending. What other data points do you have, and how do you validate the integrity of those?
Yeah, so it's specific to the variable. So we don't always ask for a high school diploma. It sort of depends on your latest education. So if you've got a college degree, then we probably don't need to verify high school and so on. And the specific processes around data points, I would say at a high level, we try to do as much of this automatically as possible. So we can pull a credit report automatically without the user needing to do too much. So we try to minimize the number of manual documents that need uploaded, except in rare circumstances. That requires a sort of mix of creativity, model-based approach to what do we actually need to verify versus what can we just take a person's word for, things like that. So kind of a wishy-washy answer of it's very specific to the individual data point, but we've spent a lot of time testing what actually needs to be validated, which is versus what doesn't.
As I would like to ask you, how do you define machine learning? How do you define artificial intelligence? Because those two seem to get lumped together, and people either believe that they're the same thing, or they're so closely tied, and maybe they are based upon your definition. So you're probably, I don't know everybody who's in the room, but you're probably the most informed person about what ML is and what AI is. So
Yeah.
give me your take on those two things and how they're similar and how they're different.
Yeah, so I would, there definitely is a lot of confusion and sort of trampling of definitions across various industries, and yeah, I don't think that there's a clear separation between these things, but I like to think in terms of our models, at least. Sort of in the early days we had traditional statistical models, so the sorts of things that were a little bit fancier than what I would have learned in school as a statistician. We then moved over to machine learning, and I distinctly remember when that happened, because now we could actually start using more, without diving too deeply into the woods, sort of tree-based models. So instead of fitting a line to something, you're sort of fitting one branch of a tree as if less than or greater than. Bundle a bunch of those up, that makes a tree. Bundle a bunch of those trees up, that makes a forest or a tree-based method. So when we started sort of not fitting lines, that was the move to machine learning. And there are a whole class of models and interesting things you can do within machine learning. Now, the line in the sand that I or we have drawn between machine learning and AI is sort of when it comes into deep learning and some of the more recently hyped models around neural nets and things like that. I don't think everyone would agree with that, in that often I see AI defined as sort of the superset of machine learning, some of these traditional statistical models, and just every sort of supervised model or unsupervised model that you might come up with. But all that to say, I don't think there's a super clean definition that we adhere to. We're just trying to give the best consumer experience we can, and we've got some internal definitions that work for us.
There's a, do we have a question over here? Okay, go ahead. I just saw, I think it's IBM's running a commercial where there's a guy that just goes, AI 13 times, and then I just want to punch the TV.
Yeah.
But it's probably working, because they're probably, a lot of executives are then probably, slacking somebody going, holy shit, get IBM on the phone. We need this AI shit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we are very much of the opinion that if we actually build the good algorithm, it doesn't matter what we call it. The results will speak for themselves, and we can call it whatever. And I as an Allen Iverson fan, when I hear AI, I still think of him. So yeah, I'm still getting used to this. Yeah.
Playoffs.
Yeah. Yep.
I actually have two questions. So you mentioned about like non-parametric models like neural nets and stuff. If you went with something like that, would there be regulatory concerns that you couldn't explain why the model made one decision or made a fun decision or a don't fun decision?
Yeah, so the approach that we've taken is to essentially test every change that we would make with the sort of agreed upon methodology. So essentially, explainability is not necessarily the sort of necessary condition for demonstrating that there's no bias. So we don't have to understand at the fundamental level exactly what's going on in the model. It's sort of an outcome-based approach, which is if we roll out this new neural net, does it approve more of these protected classes across the board? If so, this is sort of good or proves that it should be moved into the model.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then I was just reading a book called The Man Who Solved the Market about Simmons, started a hedge fund based on like quantitative investing. I was curious, with your background in stats, do you still see opportunity to do things like that today, or do you think that's sort of petered out?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. Like, I think, yeah, the opportunities here are just getting started in terms of like the problems that can be solved. I think both the hardware, like, computer chips are just better than they were, and the amount of available data, sort of the raw resource, is just more prevalent and accessible than it ever was before. So I think there are not only still opportunities like this, but more than before, especially for someone who can think outside the box a lot. Like, there are a ton of people working on these things, but you'll often find them from similar backgrounds, on similar websites, taking similar approaches. So somebody who can combine the technical know-how with the creativity to do something a little bit different or weird, I think there are tons of opportunities there.
This might be a weird question, but
Those are the best.
What's that?
Those are the best type.
Okay. It's more about cold showers. No, I'm kidding. Why did the opportunity exist for you guys to do what you're doing? Was it just the financial services companies being lazy and tired, and or did somebody just have to come and look at it with through a different lens? Why? I'm fascinated to hear your take on why do you think this was there for the taking?
Yeah, good question. I think it was some part risk aversion, or maybe not wanting to be different. We've been bankers for hundreds of years. Why would we change what's been working? But I think sort of maybe related, but at the core, underwriting was treated as a solved problem. So we've got this score, this FICO score. This will do what we need. And really, the innovation happens in marketing in some of these areas. And so it was maybe too much focus on some of the other areas of the business and sort of thinking, okay, this is a problem we've already solved. We know for this bucket of scores what the loss rates will be. Good enough. Let's figure out how we market to those people. And so I think to traditional financial institution, coming along and doing this could be as silly as like, oh, this company is really specializing in some arbitrary area of the business that's not the one that we're struggling with. And so I do, what keeps me up at night is will bigger financial institutions actually wake up to this and try to copy it and throw tens or hundreds of millions of dollars at the problem. Now, I think if we stay disciplined and are able to keep moving fast, that we'll keep pushing ahead faster than they can try to catch up. But I do think that I'm sooner or later they've got to wake up to this, because like the data is out there publicly through some of our like securitizations and things like that shows we're really doing something different, and I don't think they can stay asleep forever.
Sherry.
Thanks. So data science is a relatively new term. So for those of us who graduated 20 plus years ago and consider ourselves statisticians and know how to code R and SPSS and all that stuff, when you're recruiting for data scientists, what are the qualifications you're looking for?
Yeah.
How would you, because Catherine and I were talking about this earlier, how would you separate data science and data analytics?
Yep. Yeah, so I guess the joke is that a data scientist is a statistician who wears sandals, yeah, in that like the point being that Silicon Valley had just relabeled this thing that had existed for a long, long time and gave it a cool name. I think the gap between what I, as a statistician, was trained to do and what I do as a data scientist, I think it is some of the coding and actually like being a little closer to a computer scientist than what I would have done traditionally in statistics. So, learning some R is good, some Python and things like that. In terms of data science versus data analytics, I think we mostly distinguish that based on the cleanest distinction is based on degree. So we have data analysts with bachelor's degrees. Our data scientists tend to all have masters and mostly PhDs, except for Paul, who was a college dropout that Peter killed. So he's his own case, but I think the things we look for most in addition to these technical skills are just as like vague as it sounds, and probably frustrating if you're trying to recruit these people, as this sort of problem-solving ability and sort of intellectual humility and.
Catherine, my tape did not hold up.
Yeah, I thought that was me. I thought I knocked it. And so this willingness to be wrong and learn and iterate quickly is not for everyone. So we focus a lot on the sort of cultural aspects and intellectual humility, and that is present in a variety of backgrounds. So on the team today, we have physicists, economists, finance PhDs, operations research, computer scientists, statisticians, mathematicians, sort of all over the place. And so it is very challenging to sort of define what qualifications on paper we would look for, and that selfishly, I like this because I think it provides a certain like set of perspectives where we don't have groupthink because everyone's approaching it very differently. And I get to ask a physicist about the black hole picture that made the rounds on the internet, and like for personal reasons, I get to just learn all these cool things. But in terms of scaling up a team, it really is a like each person is unique sort of thing.
How do you, and since Catherine and Grace are here, what is your interview hiring process like? Do you get to a point where you bring somebody in and then they run a gauntlet of like interviewing with 4 or 5 people in the course of like 8 minutes, and they just want to jump out a window? Have you adopted that model?
Yeah, I wouldn't quite call it a gauntlet. It is so we do a couple of remote screens in terms of assessing technical skills, assessing fit. Again, the cultural stuff is really important. We have, and this will sound easy as I sit up here and say it, but we have definitely made the tough call in the past to pass on smart jerks, basically. So the humility part of it is a big deal, and that's probably the thing I'm proudest of, is just like how great the people are to work with. Like, of course, they're smart and doing great technical work. That's table stakes. But just how much I enjoy spending time with these people and hear the same from others. So there's that aspect of it. Then we do an on-site that's usually a couple of these hour-long interviews that probably feel a little bit like a gauntlet to some people. But luckily, we've got like kind, thoughtful interviewers, and have tried to make the process as painless as possible. Combine it with a lunch and getting to know the team and things like that.
How are you filtering for jerks and humility and likability? Is that just coming out through the course of conversation, and you're just looking for particular signals, or is it more formulaic, and have you been able to identify certain patterns or trends?
Yeah, I have, depending on the role and whether so depending on the role, there will be a different interview panel, and depending on who else is on that panel, I will ask between 1 and 4 questions that screen for this, that are very intentionally designed to weed out, it's not just jerks, but maybe a lack of ownership mentality, and things happen to me rather than I take the world by storm or whatever. So yeah, I or we try to be very intentional with our questions and sort of standardize those across to make sure that there's always at least 1, if not 2 interviewers who are assessing this, because it is so crucially important.
So we have time for one more question.
Hello. I was just wondering about like the AI and like deciding on like loans and stuff like that, of like what are kind of the parameters of like bankers look at your age, your race, your sex and stuff like that, and like those all historically have like taken into account of people getting loans. So are those things you guys take into account for loans? And if you guys have artificial intelligence, what are kind of like the studies or databases you guys use to decide which people groups are more viable for a loan than others?
Yeah, good question. So I think I would say the first wave of sort of fintech lenders came along, and their pitch would have been, we're going to move this whole process online for exactly that reason. So you go and meet a banker down the street, and they're, you know, whether they will admit it or not, they're judging you based on your race, your gender, your age, and things like that. They may not be doing it intentionally, but it is sort of just the reality, you know, implicit bias and such. And so by moving this online and automating it, at least the human element is removed. And then so we've sort of worked to develop this methodology with the regulator, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, to ensure that the models we're building don't have sort of any adverse impact on these groups. And so this is an ongoing effort where every time we make a change to the model, we test it to make sure that there are no unexpected changes in terms of the outcome. Yeah.
With the AI, does it know my like something that I necessarily don't put down, but like through my background check, like my race or my age, would it know something like that and put it down in your guys' database?
No, so it wouldn't know that. It is certainly possible that the attributes you have are correlated with these things. So, you know, age, for example, would be correlated with education and things like that. So these correlations exist. Now, the only way that would get used in the model would be if there were some sort of underlying causal link between that and the risk. And conditional on the model sort of being accurate enough and understanding the full picture, this will not actually be a useful signal. And so we test for that to make sure that that's not happening. So come at it from both angles, I think. Again, this is, like, frankly, many companies will make claims like this, and so you should be skeptical of these claims. But this sort of public report and then the doubling down that the regulator made, I think you should go and read these things, or I like talking about them at length because I think it is so unusual that it's been done, that I think we are doing something truly different here, and I want to spread the good word as much as I can.
Please help me thank Grant for joining us tonight.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, man.